Hi, this is Julie, and welcome to Throwback Thursday. In honor of Mother's Quest turning 5, this season 7 of the podcast will bring episodes to you every Thursday. In addition to new episodes, we'll also share some powerful conversations from the archives. Keep in mind while listening that you may hear about some events or offerings that are no longer current. But whether you've heard this episode before or it's new to you, I hope you'll find something here as relevant as ever to light your way. This week, as so many of us in California went to the ballots to place our votes, I knew I wanted to reshare this episode with then Assemblymember Rob Bonta, but who is now our California Attorney General. And I really also love the dedication in this episode from Celia Ward Wallace, who now is the co-founder of South LA Cafe. Both Rob and Celia have families that are rooted in activism and community organizing and are also continuing to find new ways to make an impact using their gifts and their talents and their vision. So I hope that you enjoy this episode, and I know that you'll find lots of insights from listening. Now onto the show. And welcome to Mother's Quest, a podcast for moms like me ready to live our own truly epic life. I'm Julie Neal, a life and leadership coach, community builder, writer, and mom to 2 high-energy boys who challenge me to grow into my best self. I'll be right there. Where was I? Hello, and welcome to the second special episode this month of the Mother's Quest podcast in honor of Father's Day, with someone I've known and admired for over a decade through our connection at Alternatives in Action, California Assemblymember Rob Bonta. This month of June has been a time to focus on the amazing fathers in our lives. It's also been primary election month in many communities. When I thought about who I could interview who was both an amazing father and committed to a life of public service, Rob immediately came to mind. When we pressed record on this interview, Rob had just been elected for a 4th term to the California State Assembly's 18th District, where he represents the cities of Oakland, Alameda, and San Leandro, and became in 2012 the first Filipino American legislator in the 165-year history of California. Prior to this, Rob utilized his law degree from Yale to serve as Deputy City Attorney for the City and County of San Francisco, and served as the chair of the City of Alameda's Economic Development Commission and as board president for the Social Service Human Relations Board, before he became vice mayor of the City of Alameda, the position he held as he ran for the state assembly. Before I share more about what we discuss in this interview, I want to welcome Celia Ward Wallace with this dedication in honor of her father, Eric Mann, and her mother, Leanne Hurst Mann.
My name is Celia Ward Wallace, and I am a mama, a wifey, an entrepreneur, activist, and community builder. And I am so honored to dedicate this episode of the Mother's Quest podcast to my mom and dad, Eric Mann and Leanne Hurst Mann, whose tireless dedication to social justice, community organizing, and fighting for equity and a socialization of resources and opportunities for everyone on the planet has impacted the lives of people all over the world. Together, my parents committed their lives happily for 50 years to this work, and to this day, they're still in the struggle. They believe that it is their duty as white people to fight and never stop fighting, and this is a belief they have also ingrained within me. They reminded my sisters and me every day that because of our being white, our economic status, our education, our citizenship, and all of the other privileges that our arbitrary birth provided, we had a duty to never forget our privilege and never stop fighting to overthrow the structures of oppression. This family legacy of activism and community organizing lives on today within us and within the next generation of our children, my parents' grandchildren. Take a moment to honor today's guest and my parents by asking yourself these questions. How can I take action to support those on the front lines working for change every day? How can I not only learn, listen, and understand more, but can also do more? Which community organizations and leaders will I support with my money, time, and influence?
Thank you, Celia, for this beautiful dedication and the powerful questions for us to explore. I've come to know and love your mother, Leanne, and was reminded of her and your father's modeling of activism and community organizing when I talked with Rob about the impact his parents had on him from an early age. We started our conversation reflecting on Rob's childhood and how his father, who stood with Dr. Martin Luther King in the Civil Rights Movement, and his mother, a longtime leader in the Filipino social justice movement, taught him to understand injustice and the importance of joining the struggle to empower vulnerable communities. We reflect on some epic snapshot moments from Rob's childhood. Growing up in a trailer just a few hundred yards from Cesar Chavez's home, Rob watched closely as his parents organized Filipino and Mexican American farm workers, infusing his formative years with first-hand experience of one of the greatest peaceful social, racial, and economic justice movements of all time. Then we delve into how the epic guideposts show up in Rob's life, how he makes space for each of his 4 children and allows them to step into leadership and activism on their own, his passionate and purposeful work and the causes he's championing as an assemblyman, from early childhood education to affordable housing, the deep connection to his community that fulfills and restores him, and the family connections that are everything to him, especially the one with his wife, Mia Lisa, who he met in college and has been married to for 21 years. We also had the opportunity to talk about AB 931 and SB 1421, 2 bills aimed at reducing instances of police brutality and increasing police accountability. Moving through some discomfort I felt in the moment, I asked Rob, and then Rob agreed, to work toward getting these bills passed, to talk with the founders of Mothers Against Police Brutality for policy insight, and to explore bringing a powerful play called Mothers to Sacramento to shine light on the real stories of families who've lost loved ones to police violence. At the end, Rob challenged me and all of us to hold him and other lawmakers accountable to the issues and causes that matter most to us. In a heart-wrenching week when our government is separating children from their families at the border, Rob's message and call to action to hold our leaders accountable resonates deeply. I left the conversation with renewed commitment to do so, modeling engagement, not apathy, for my children, and saying yes to creating my own family's legacy of activism and leadership. I hope you'll join me. I'm Julie Neal, and this is Mother's Quest. Rob, welcome to the Mother's Quest podcast. It's been a while since we've spoken, but we've been connected to one another through our mutual work supporting youth development in Oakland and through Alternatives in Action for years. And it's been such a pleasure to watch you step into more leadership and public service, and congratulations on your win this week.
Thank you, Julie. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to serve and had an election that would provide me an opportunity to potentially serve a 4th term. And before that, I really enjoyed all of our work together with AIA and other work. And we have shared values and similar goals for how we want to improve our society. And I'm very excited to have this opportunity to spend time with you in this forum.
Fantastic. Well, this is one of 2 special episodes I'm releasing in the month of June in honor of Father's Day. Typically, I interview amazing mothers who are living what I call an epic life. But this month, I wanted to shine a light on some of the amazing fathers out there. And as I was preparing for this interview and, reviewing your bio, there were many things in it that I already knew about you. But there were so many things I didn't know, and that are such hallmarks of an epic life lived already. You have so much life ahead of you, but there are, some amazing things about your life that I am excited to delve into. So I want to start with the first question, which is for you to tell me a little bit about your own childhood and the impact that your own mother, and if you also want to share some about your father for this special episode, the impact that they had in shaping who you are.
Well, my mom is an immigrant from the Philippines. She came to the United States as an adult, and she met my father here, who grew up in Southern California in Ventura County. And they went back to the Philippines after they met, and that's where I was born. And what I remember a lot from both my parents was their shared commitment to social justice and their belief in the power of movements and in people power to create change that they wanted. And I saw both of them heavily engaged in that, or heard them passionately tell me their stories of their involvement. My dad, for example, was involved in the civil rights movement in the United States. He took a train out for multiple days Selma, Alabama, because he felt compelled to be there when he heard on audio cassette tapes the voice of this amazing leader and minister who was talking about justice and equality and the fight in the United States to achieve those goals. And he marched and stood with Martin Luther King Jr. And the only reason he came back was because his mother was on her deathbed and he came home to say goodbye to her. My mom, when we were in the Philippines, when I was just born, she was a political activist fighting against the rise to power of Ferdinand Marcos, who became a dictator, was well known for his human rights abuses. He was also known for, quote unquote, disappearing his political opponents. And my mom was one of his political opponents. And so we left for the safety of our family and went back to California about a year before martial law was declared by Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines. And my mom continued to fight against his regime and his human rights abuses and corruption for years until the People's Power Revolution in 1986, when he was deposed and democracy was restored in the Philippines. And after we got to California, when I was still a baby and then a young boy, my parents worked with the United Farm Workers of America. And they started working in Los Angeles with the lettuce boycott, and they collected signatures in front of supermarkets, petition gatherers, and then they later went to the headquarters of the United Farm Workers of America movement in La Paz, outside of Bakersfield in the Tehachapi Mountains. And there, my brother and my sister and I lived in a trailer with my mom and my dad. We lived a stone's throw away from the home of Cesar Chavez. My dad worked in the front office with Cesar Chavez. My mom worked in the preschool. She worked with Dolores Huerta, and other great leaders like Philip Vera Cruz were there that made that one of the greatest, most powerful social, economic, and racial justice movements and labor movements in the history of our state and our nation. And, that's what I grew up hearing from my parents. And those were the values that they shared with me at the breakfast table, at the dinner table, when we would talk. So in terms of the impact that my mother had and my father had in shaping who I am today, they instilled in me a belief that public service is the highest of callings, that it's a noble and worthwhile and fulfilling area to work in. A lot of parents want their kids to be lawyers and doctors and engineers, especially in some of our Asian Pacific Islander families. And my parents, there was some of that, certainly, to be successful, but they always, I think, wanted me to, consider how we're going to change this world for the better, how we're going to fight for our voiceless and our vulnerable and those who need help the most. And so I grew up always believing that I was going to do some form of public service, whether it be working in a nonprofit or working in a government agency or whatever it may be. But my parents made me believe that everyday people working side by side with other everyday people committed to a common goal can create great change. And they were in movements where that's exactly what happened. So they inspired me and made me believe that public service was an area where I could have an impact and I could make a difference. And I saw them work together with their colleagues to ask those in power, those with influence, those in elected office to make decisions that would help the people that they cared about. And I thought with all of the opportunities that they gave me to go to great public California schools and to go away to college and then to go to law school, that with those opportunities and those doors, maybe in the next generation, I could actually be one of those decision makers, be the person in the room with a seat at the table and a voice in the room, and bring those values that my parents taught me into that room to help those folks and not have to ask someone else who may or may not decide to agree with them, but actually be that person and fight for those communities who needed it the most. So I think I'm in the role that I'm in today because of my parents.
Yeah. Wow. What an incredibly rich way to grow up and what a legacy they were living for you. I have the pleasure of also knowing your sister, Lisa. She and I were partnering together this year on bringing some coaching and reflective practices to the adult staff at Alternatives in Action. And I could see the same seeds of justice and service in her too. So I'm not surprised.
My brother as well.
Yeah. What is your brother doing?
He is working on diversifying the environmental movement. And making sure that it reflects all of our communities and our diverse communities, and particularly making sure that there's space for and leadership roles for and inclusion of communities of color in the environmental movement. And he keynotes and coaches and consults all across the nation on that.
Wow, incredible. I often talk with the people who come on the podcast about this idea of an epic snapshot moment. These moments in our lives when it seems like time slows down and we can remember what happened in vivid detail because it is filled with all the things that matter most to us. And hearing you talk about your childhood and the example that your parents set for you, I'm really curious about if you have an epic snapshot moment from your childhood that really captures your, these seeds that were planted in you for social justice.
Well, there are two. And one is when I met Cesar Chavez. And I just remember it was a meeting that you would expect from an adult and a young boy who at the time surely wouldn't be capable of appreciating who he was talking to and what was happening in the world at that time and Cesar Chavez's role in that. But I remember the feeling of being around something special and something great and something powerful that was a, grassroots, people-fueled power. And I remember that then. I still have that feeling today. And I also have that feeling from many times when I was in rallies and demonstrations and protests as a boy, with my mother and often with my father, chanting, demanding, pointing out injustice and demanding reform and correction and progress. And that same feeling of being around, a power that was generated by the people around me.
Yeah.
So those were moments where, I felt, engaged and, filled with passion and purpose, and that we were all committed to a common goal and connected to something larger than just me as an individual, something that was much more powerful than the sum of its parts and what we've created together.
I think this is a great segue into the epic guideposts, which we're going to try in lightning round fashion because I know that you have a train to catch. But the epic connotes this idea of us really being the author of our stories and our life and being the hero of our journey. And it's also an acronym mnemonic for the guideposts that I think help us live that life when we're raising our children. And the first one, E, stands for engaged, and it's about being engaged mindfully with our children. I'm really curious to know in what ways you've been able to help plant these same seeds and give your own children some similar experiences as the ones that you were just sharing.
Well, it's sort of high level. First, I'll just say in terms of the overall goals of living an epic life and being the hero of your own journey. And one of the things I've come to deeply believe after being in different professional roles and having different jobs and over the years is that life's too short to do something that you don't love. And it's a privilege to be able to do it. I'm currently privileged to be able to say I have the best job I've ever had. I'm doing something that I care deeply about. I wake up every day thinking about how I'm going to change people's lives for the better. And to me, there's nothing more fulfilling. It's exactly what I want to do. I'm living my dream. And to the extent others are able to do that, I certainly highly encourage it. Because when you're doing what you love, you'll be fulfilled and you'll be great at it and you'll make people's lives better. So with respect to engaging with my children, I have 3 amazing children. They are now 19, 13, and 9. 2 oldest are daughters, and my youngest is a son. And my wife, Mia, and I have always both worked. We've been a dual working household our entire time that we've had kids. And we try to share with them what we love and care about and are passionate about by what we do. And we include them and invite them when appropriate, but we don't pressure. And I think over time, they see the passion that we share for what we have, for what we do. And I think there's an appreciation for sure. And, I know there were times when my oldest daughter, who's now a freshman in college, or between her freshman and sophomore year in the summer, she's going to be a sophomore when she goes back in August, where she, was very dubious and down on the fact that both of her parents were attorneys and see the value of that or why that was important or how that could help people or society. And now she's in a very different place as she's grown older and kind of seen the things that I've done and my wife has done as the founder and CEO of her own nonprofit early childhood education organization, and someone who has been in the foundation world and had various roles, all which had the same goal of providing greater opportunity for children, mostly Black and brown children from disadvantaged, poor backgrounds. And now, she's thinking about running for public office someday. She wants to go to law school. She is absolutely excited about different opportunities to fight for and hopefully achieve racial and social justice. She volunteered at a human trafficking organization that helps survivors of human trafficking. She will be working for one of the leading nonprofits in Oakland who fight for social justice this summer. And so that's kind of the continuum I might have expected. It wasn't sort of a sit down, conversation where we were like, here's what mom and dad do and why we want you to, here's what we want you to do. It was kind of, we love you, you love your family and your parents. And when you see what we're passionate about, maybe that will have an impact on you.
Yeah.
So in terms of our work and our engagement with our kids, that's kind of how it's been. And there are thousands of things, too many to count, that they could go to, but we don't want to be dragging them to, events every night or on weekends or campaign rallies or, knocking on doors on my side or all of the, the book giveaways and community engagement events that Mia does. And we also, was kind of more importantly, we just create space to be with each other. And for me, it's super important to definitely do things as a group and have family time. And we try to have family meals with some regularity and family outings where we can all interact together and enjoy each other's company. But I also it had always been important to me to do one-on-ones with each kid and just spend that one-on-one time and, hear their thoughts that they can share with me and enjoy moments with just them. I took each child on a trip to another country where it could just be me and them, and exploring something and having an adventure that would be unique for us, for dad and daughter or dad and son. And those are moments I know that I certainly remember, and I know that they do too.
That's incredible. I really appreciate this idea of making space for them, both in terms of giving them space to have a childhood that's separate from the work you're doing, making space to have quality experiences together, and making space for them to kind of come to this same commitment in their own way, in a natural way, and by observing your example as opposed to it being something that you're really forcing to them. Thank you for sharing all of that.
Sure.
I think the next guidepost, which we would naturally be led to then, P stands for passionate and purposeful. And you mentioned the work that you're passionate about. And I'd love to get a chance to shine some light now on maybe one or two of the key issues that you are most passionate about, bringing forward through your role as an assembly member.
The thing I love the most about being a California state legislator is the ability to have an impact on people's lives and improve people's lives and make people's lives better. And I've always loved being a Californian. I love it more than ever right now, given California's unique leadership role in the nation, I believe in the world, as a state of progressive, forward-thinking leadership. And we're moving on so many things, from protecting the environment to defending our immigrants to standing up for civil rights and civil liberties to pushing for health care for all, addressing our affordability and housing crisis, addressing things like human trafficking, criminal justice reform, ending mass incarceration, early childhood education, the list goes on. And I actually have a hard time focusing on just one or two areas. I feel like there are so many places where we need to do more, we must do better, where people need leaders to step up and provide more support. And all those areas that I just named are areas that I am incredibly passionate about. But two of them that are really important right now are early childhood education and affordable housing. Right now, we're in an affordability crisis. We're in a housing crisis. We have a situation where people can't live in the communities where they grew up. They can't live anywhere near where they work. They can't live in the neighborhoods that they love. They're being pushed out and displaced. They're making decisions between having a roof over their head or food on their table and the rent, and the price of housing just keeps going higher and higher. And we have visible homeless encampments throughout many of our urban centers in California, and people need relief, and we need to provide greater supply of affordable housing and also protections for our tenants. So that's something that I am very focused on right now, very passionate about, and probably the issue that I hear about most in my assembly district of Oakland, Alameda, and San Leandro. I also care deeply about early childhood education. It's definitely a shared value and passion in our family. This is Mia's work, as I mentioned, founded and is now the CEO of an organization that provides early childhood education services and uses technology to deliver those services. To me, it's a social justice issue around every child having a fair start and a head start in life and having access to high quality early childhood education. 80% of the brain is formed by age 3, 90% is formed by the time our kids are getting to kindergarten. So much of the cognitive growth and development has already occurred before our kids even hit kindergarten. And I believe that a child's zip code and income or race should never dictate their destiny or foretell their future. And every child should have an opportunity to fulfill their dreams and meet their full potential. And to me, that starts with early childhood education. And it's a place where we've fallen down as a state, as a nation, as a society. Generally, we haven't provided enough support and resources for it. And the data and the science is absolutely clear that the early modest investment in our children at a young age, before they get to kindergarten, pays massive dividends in terms of their development and growth, and, economic dividends in terms of preparing the workforce for tomorrow. And we've just missed the boat and haven't done enough here. And I believe that we can and should do more. I believe that we should have universal preschool, certainly for our 4 and 5-year-olds, but also be doing more for our kids from 0 to 3. And those are 2 areas that I'm super passionate about: early childhood education and addressing our homeless crisis, our affordability and housing crisis.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember this, but my husband, Chris, is an affordable housing developer and leader in San Jose, and has also been, regularly talking in our home and family about the crisis. It's one that we're very close to as well. So, Rob, I also want a chance to talk with you a little bit about another pressing concern, certainly in the state of California, but really across the country, that I know that you care deeply about too, which is the issue of so many men and also women of color who have lost their lives to police violence, and the need for more police accountability and some changes to our laws. I'd love to hear your perspective about this, and also where you stand on 2 bills that I understand are coming to Assembly to try to increase awareness about police officers who have maybe records of previous police brutality issues, and also to explore changing some of the regulations about when it's okay to use deadly force.
This is a national epidemic. It's a problem that has existed far too long and needs to change. We've seen these national tragedies time and time again. We've experienced them as a nation, where boys and men of color largely, but also women of color, have died at the hands of police officers in situations where it just didn't need to happen and they were avoidable. And so I think there's a level of urgency that's built up over time that is reaching a culminating point, and it requires action and taking steps to address this issue. I think where a healthy debate occurs is, what is the appropriate action? What solutions address this problem and will solve it and will make a difference in lives? And what solutions might have unintended consequences or not be a solution that fits the problem? And so having the debate is super important. Confronting the issue, universally accepting it as a problem, as unacceptable, and needing fundamental transformational change is step 1. And I don't know if we're there yet as a community, as a society. Larger pockets of California are, even larger pockets of my assembly district in the East Bay, that includes Oakland, Alameda, and San Leandro, are there. I think some folks will still argue there's not a problem, and that to me is very difficult to accept and to understand. There's a problem, period, end of story. It's unacceptable. It needs to change. So what are the changes that we need to take? And I've been working on this issue for some time. There was a strong sort of push a couple of years ago. I had a piece of legislation that would have provided for additional training around procedural justice, which is sort of a term that describes a better way of police officers, law enforcement officers, to work with the community, to provide respect and to listen and to acknowledge what they're hearing from community members, and to do better community policing and be more sensitive to those they interact with. And I think that's a part of it. I don't think that's a cure-all or a panacea. I think that if more police departments had that type of training included in their sort of regimen for preparing their officers to do the job, that would be good. There's other types of training that are really important too, understanding mental health issues and being sensitive to those among members of the public as a law enforcement officer interacts with. De-escalation training and policies provide guidance as to when a officer should step back from a situation rather than engage and escalate it, so that the use of force, the possibilities of the use of force, go up. When you have crimes that are relatively low level, property crimes or misdemeanors, and they lead to someone dying, it's hard for people to understand why. And it should be hard to understand why. No one should die because of a low level property crime or a traffic stop without more. And so, understanding the best ways to engage or disengage, or when to use force or when not to, I think is really important. That comes with training. There's also the 2 issues that you've raised. One about police records and making them public. so that folks know about officers that have engaged in certain conduct that's gone through a process where the officer has had an opportunity to make his case and share his side or her side of what happened, and a neutral arbiter has made a determination there was misconduct. I think if there was, essentially the way I describe it, a sustained complaint about a serious use of force or a serious level of misconduct, and the officer has had due process and been able to provide evidence and be represented by an attorney or a representative, and an independent neutral body or person has found that complaint is sustained and that it was, whatever the standard is, more likely than not, or by clear and convincing evidence, whatever the standard is, that it occurred, then I think in those situations, it's really important for the public to know. That's different than just a complaint. So I think that is important, that there's a public, a compelling public interest in knowing about those officers. It's devastating when there's an incident, when an officer is involved in a deadly shooting of a member of the public, and then you then find out afterwards for the first time that officer had previous sustained complaints of serious misconduct or use of force. Because you think that if that was known, there could have been steps that would be taken to avoid that death. That was an avoidable death.
Exactly.
So I think it's important to have a level of accountability to the public, of public disclosure under the circumstances that I've indicated. And so there's a bill in the Assembly that Nancy Skinner is authoring that is going through the process and deals with this very issue. And so when it comes over to the Assembly, I'll have a chance to look at its current form and see what amendments it's taken and see if it kind of fits with the standards and requirements of an appropriate bill that I have in mind, and I'll get a chance to vote on it. But I think if it does fit within what I've described, I'll support it, and I think it will make a difference.
And then I understand there's another bill, I think it's number 931, which addresses when police officers are justified in using deadly force. Have you heard about this one yet?
Yeah, so there's a bill. Dr. Shirley Weber is the author. It's in the Senate side right now. Essentially changes the longstanding reasonable use of force standard to a necessary use of force standard. And to me, I just have a good amount of questions. I don't know that the bill is in complete form in terms of providing details as to what the new definition means, what it would mean in certain scenarios, how it will be implemented. So I just have a lot of questions about changing the standard of reasonable use of force. Has been a state standard. It's been a federal national standard that's been expounded upon and amplified and given detail to through cases and cases of judges looking at it and sort of building this body of law that provides the standard for use of force. I completely agree with the goal and the intent that the use of force, while appropriate in some circumstances and justified, has spilled over to situations where it just doesn't seem appropriate and justified, and where there's been avoidable deaths and tragedies that we don't need. I agree with that. I hope that there will be solutions created that address that problem. I don't yet know if this is the one. I think it needs to be built out a little bit more and given detail and have amendments taken to really spell out how it would work in different scenarios. If the intent is for there never to be uses of force, then I have a problem with that. I think that law enforcement officers are given a specific role in our society so that the everyday civilians don't take the use of force into their own hands under certain situations when there's danger to the public and the public needs to be protected and it's reasonable. They can use force, and they're given that responsibility in our community. And, if it's to defend innocent bystanders or to protect a victim or to protect a family, and they need to use force, not necessarily lethal force, but force, then, and it's reasonable to do so, then I want them to be able to do that to keep people safe and to be used in an appropriate manner. Of course, I don't want it to go too far. I don't want innocent lives to be taken that are avoidable. I certainly want an end, and we need an end and should have an end soon as possible, to the unneeded deaths of boys and men of color and any community members of color and beyond that are unnecessary. So I just don't know yet if this is the answer. I need to see more detail. I need to see how it would be implemented under certain situations. And sort of key to it all is make sure there's no unintended consequences. But I agree with the spirit and the intent of the bill, which is basically saying, we as a state have had enough of these avoidable killings of boys and men of color at the hands of police officers. So for this one, I think more to come. The bill's in its early stages and it's in the other house. And as it sort of moves through the process and takes on a little more life and a little more detail, I'll have more information that I can make a judgment on. But yeah, so I have my kind of standards of kind of what is needed for it to be appropriate. It needs to address the problem and just the problem and not have unintended consequences.
Yeah. I'm noticing my own discomfort sitting in me. I want to challenge you, and it feels uncomfortable. Not to say yes to this particular bill in its current form, but what I want to ask you is, would you be willing to champion getting the legislation where it needs to be so that there can be movement on this? And I have a particular request that's coming to me in the moment. And of course, I have had the honor of meeting Colette Flanagan and talking and interviewing Sarah Mercuria. They are the founder and co-founders of Mothers Against Police Brutality. Colette lost her son at the hands of a police officer, and Sarah actually saw her father killed when she was a child by a police officer. And they are so close to this issue and really believe that the answer to the problem is based in policy reform. I'm wondering, in these critical days before these bills come, if you'd be open to a conversation with them to understand more and to hear, what they're advocating for in terms of these kinds of laws and really champion this issue.
Of course. I'd be more than happy to. I think that's my role, my job. It's also my personal desire to learn as much as possible, hear as much as possible, hear all sides of a policy issue that I'm working on to be better informed as a policymaker and to hear, the human impact. It's one thing to sort of talk about policy, and we do it all the time, and it can sound sort of distant in terms of, sort of lawmakers in Sacramento wordsmithing a document that creates a policy, right? But at the end of every policy is a Californian and a life and a person and a family and, children and adults throughout the state who are impacted in a fundamental way. And to hear the personal stories of individuals who are wrestling with a current policy that doesn't work or that creates harm or pain, and hearing how it can be changed and fixed for the better is always some of the most powerful interactions that I can have. So I put this in that category and would love to do that.
Thank you so much. As you say that, I'm thinking of another really powerful experience I had recently. Because I released that episode, I got connected to a woman named Lori Valdez who lost her husband actually at San Jose State University to police officers. And she became part of this play that I just saw. It was a performance professor at San Jose State, collected all of these essentially like oral histories of mothers who lost their children, and then in Lori's case, her partner, and then ended up creating this incredibly moving piece and performance where students from San Jose State took on the roles and shared the stories of these mothers. And I had a thought that it would be so powerful to bring this performance to Sacramento so that the lawmakers could, as you said, connect these policies to the real people who have been impacted. So if it's okay with you, as a follow-up, I'll get you connected to Mothers Against Police Brutality. And then I'd also just love to explore the possibility of bringing this powerful play and these stories somehow to the lawmakers in Sacramento.
For sure. Same sort of in the same spirit of what I just described, sort of bringing the real life impacts to the Capitol, to legislators who are deciding on policy that will make a difference in these individuals' lives, to sort of hear it firsthand. There's nothing more powerful. There's nothing more informative. So I think that will be a wonderful opportunity. And we do things like that in different forms. Sometimes it's, a documentary film that reveals a problem through sort of a deeper dive that people haven't focused on, and it provides new information and a new understanding of an area that California legislators can address and help solve. Sometimes it's individuals, coming and meeting with assembly members and senators and telling their story. I always find that to be incredibly powerful. And then certainly it could be telling their story and through this play. So I think it's very appropriate, very helpful, very welcome, and something that I would like to help make happen in partnership with you.
Thank you. We will definitely follow up, and I'll make sure to include updates for the Mother's Quest community along the way as we move through this together. So we're going to shift gears in a big way to the next guidepost, I, which stands for invested in yourself. And, even just moving through this really serious topic together, I can only imagine what it feels like for you to be called forward into leadership on issues that are complex like this, And, as you mentioned before, there are so many pressing issues that are of great concern that you're having to move through. I'd love to hear what you do to sort of restore and sustain yourself and to find your own guides to help you move through this incredibly important but really challenging work that you're doing.
One of the main things I like to do is be in my district as much as possible, be with my constituents, be home, be with my family, be with my wife and my 3 kids as much as possible. That keeps me rooted, that keeps me connected to the constituents who voted me in to represent them. Sometimes when, Sacramento can definitely be, the capital can be a bubble that has a sort of a life of its own. That connectivity back out from the capital of our legislative districts is so important to make sure that those voices are coming through and being heard and are loud. And I can amplify those voices and be a champion and representative for them when I'm on the ground, so to speak, more. So I come home from the capital a lot. I have the ability and privilege to do that given my relative proximity, my district's relative proximity to the capital, especially compared to some of my colleagues who are from San Diego and LA and Central Valley and some of the coastal areas down south. I can get home with relative ease compared to them. And I seek opportunities to do that. I want to do that. I think it makes me a better representative for my community, and it makes me happy to be in my district. I love my district. I'm privileged and fortunate to be able to represent it. And being here, it makes me comfortable. It makes me, some of the things you were saying, restores me and keeps me balanced. My family, especially. As I started this journey in public service at the local level, it was mostly folks who, retired and had some time so they could volunteer or didn't have the day-to-day responsibilities and commitments of raising children and had the time to be able to serve. And I thought that critical voices were being lost, like the voices of everyday moms and dads and, parents of children who, like me, were, part of a dual working household where both parents work to make ends meet and were, working hard to pay for the mortgage or the rent to keep a roof over their family's head and wanted their kids to go to strong schools and to be able to realize their dreams and achieve their full potential. That voice wasn't on a lot of these bodies. And I thought it was really important that it be there, because that represents a huge cross-section of our constituencies, sort of the folks that are so busy, as so many of us are, with their daily lives, that they don't have a lot of extra time to, engage with their local electeds, but they want their experience to be recognized and they want their voices to be heard. Making decisions every day about education and about children and about families and about working parents. Being all those things helps me be connected to all those things, and being many of those things helps me be a more informed legislator. And again, just, the more time I can be with my wife and my 3 kids, then the happier I am, the more restored I am, the more energized I am. And it reminds me of why I'm doing what I do, because there's families like this all across the state that are hoping and wanting their legislators to represent them and understand them and fight for them and provide better opportunities for them to be successful and to achieve their dreams. And so that's what I like to do. Other things I like to do, I like to exercise as much as possible. That's more of a mental health thing than a physical health thing. I run, I bike. I've been able to bring playing soccer, which I did as a young boy and through college and a little bit beyond, back into my life, which has always been sort of a pillar of who I am and what I love. It makes me happy to be on the field with my teammates and to be working together and towards a common goal. And my wife and I, our favorite date night had always been going to the movies, and it continues to be. And we do that with the kids too. So I'm a master of all the Disney movies that have come out and all the superhero.
What's your favorite Disney movie?
There's been some good ones over the years, and but there's sort of with the recency effect. I thought Moana was a good one. Frozen was a good one. I'm probably mixing Pixar and Disney at this point, but sort of those animated films that come out around Thanksgiving, right before Christmas, we usually hit them all with the family.
I was reading recently about your college experience and that you were the captain of your soccer team. And was it Yale?
Yes.
You went to? And then, am I remembering correctly that that's also where you met Mia Lisa?
It is. You are.
So I'd love to hear, we're moving into the last guidepost C, which stands for connected to a strong support network. And you've already started to touch on that with the ways in which being connected to your family and rooted in your local community and your district really does feed you. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about, the other important connections in your life. And maybe we could start with your relationship with Nia Lisa, which has spanned decades now. Tell me a little bit about your connection with her and what you feel like has helped to make that relationship endure. And then any other places where you feel like you find your connection that helps you feel like you're in community on your journey.
Sure. Mia and I met in a orientation program in New Haven, Connecticut before we actually started as freshmen at Yale College. It was an orientation program for incoming students of color. Spent, I think it was a week or maybe a week and a half with one another before classes officially started. I was there early as well for preseason for soccer, which is a fall sport, and we started some of our training and preparation in the summertime before school actually started. And she walked into a room and I felt an instant connection, and I wanted to get to know her and spend more time with her. And during that orientation program, which it was a cross-section of the freshman student body population, then be on campus all together in a few days, I was able to find some time to do that. We were able to have a connection with each other. And, by a couple weeks in my freshman school year, this is back in 1989, August and September, we were a couple. And we were 17 years old, both of us. I was a little young for my grade. She was a lot young for her grade. She skipped a grade when she was younger. We've been together ever since. And we've been together for almost 30 years. We've been married for 21. I think if I'm doing my count right. And, she's everything to me. She's my partner in life. She's my partner in service. We share a similar set of values in terms of our commitments to our community and to children. And she founded and is the CEO of an early childhood education nonprofit organization based in West Oakland. Serves kids are much like what she was and who she was as a young girl. She grew up poor, raised by a single mom in the Bronx in New York. She moved, get what it was. It's like 20 plus times in 13 years. So she was always moving around, and what always kept her sort of anchored was she had this crate of books that she brought with her that she would always have her head buried in books, and sort of, reading and growing and literacy and education was sort of her path to something different and a pathway out of poverty. And she sees herself in so many of children that she works with, and she wants them to be able to have the same opportunities that she had. And she thinks that pathway is through education and early childhood education. And I think she's right. And so she's very passionate about that, as am I. And she's helped fuel my passion and inform me about the importance of early childhood education. As I mentioned before, we've always been a dual working household. We've always both worked. It's always been, we're doing our best to raise our 3 kids together while we're, working full time, and never easy, but because we have each other and we can support one another and have each other's backs and help each other when we need it, be able to raise a family and buy a home and move along in our careers in ways that we're passionate about and fulfill us. But the bedrock of it all is that relationship that we started back in New Haven, Connecticut in 1989.
Amazing. Well, it's reminding me, the other episode that I released this month in honor of Father's Day was a conversation with my own father, who first spotted my mom peeking through the doors of his house as my mom was getting a lesson from his mother in voice and elocution when my mom was 11. And they've been in each other's lives ever since. And Chris and I met when I was 19. And I think these are kind of exceptional love stories in a time when a lot of people aren't able to stay together. But it does seem like being rooted in values and really seeing life in the same way and really viewing marriage as a partnership are some key ingredients to all of our success.
For sure. And I've been lucky to have me in my life, and, lucky that she took a chance on this crazy guy from California that was stepping foot in the East Coast for the first time. And I'm, just so happy to have enjoyed her love and support for all this time, and more than happy to give it back to her. But yeah, it's very much a partnership. And it's also a partnership that's, supported by broader family relationships and support. our lives wouldn't work with the leadership role that she has and the travel that she does and the responsibilities that she has and sort of the work that I have, pulling me to Sacramento regularly 4 days a week for 8 months a year. And then I'll, throughout the state and sometimes out of state, even out of country. It wouldn't work without the support of our parents. Mostly her mom and my mom. My mom lives next door to us. She's lived next door to us since my oldest, Raina, was just a young girl, and she's helped raise all of them and been that support that we've needed and that I've loved to see with, my kids knowing their grandmother, their Lola, which is the name for grandmother in Tagalog, and my mom knowing her grandkids so well. It's literally an extended family situation where my mom lives next door to us, and my kids and Mia's kids are spending a lot of time with her. Mia's mom also lives nearby in Richmond. She helps out a lot with the kids. My sister lives in Alameda with her amazing husband, Aaron, and her 2 beautiful kids, Malaya and Jackson, and we see each other regularly for holidays and special events and sports activities and those things. So having that family network and that support and that love while we do some of the crazy things that we do is absolutely critical, and our lives wouldn't work without it.
Well, we are getting to the close of our conversation. This is the moment typically when my guest gives me and anyone who's listening a challenge. I'm wondering what emerges for you from themes of what we've discussed that you would like to challenge me to.
I'd like to challenge you and your listeners to either continue to or step up more to hold your leaders accountable to your values and the things that you care about and are passionate about and are important to your lives. That's what makes us better as leaders. It's what makes us stronger, and it's what makes our community better and helps it grow. And that's what this whole democratic project is about. It's about elected representative leaders representing the voices of those who they represent. And it doesn't work if those that we represent are silent or ambivalent or disengaged or apathetic. The opposite is needed and invited. Heavy engagement, heavy sharing of what's important to you, and then a dialogue about how to get to solutions that work. But we're all better, we're all stronger when we have heavy engagement civically. That's something that you and I explored through AIA, or having our young people engaged in their world and their communities, going to school board meetings and city council meetings and doing community projects. And some people say that the enemy of democracy is one party or the other. Democrats say it's Republicans, Republicans say it's Democrats. Maybe people say right now that it's Trump. To me, it's none of that, although I'm not a big fan of Trump. It is the enemy of democracy and strong communities is apathy. And so I want to challenge you, and I don't think it's that big a challenge for you, knowing you and, and what you've done, but I don't want you to feel uncomfortable pushing back or asking for accountability. That's what I expect of you. It's what I want of you, and it's what I want and expect of your listeners.
Thank you. I do accept. I will say in this week in particular, when there's been so much in the news about these children being ripped from their parents through immigration, it has been hard to stay engaged because there is this desire to want to just shut off because it's so painful, and this feeling of, not knowing what can be done. I do appreciate that challenge and that reminder, and I commit to that. And actually, what I'm about to say next leads me into the very last thing we're going to do, which is time for us to just share acknowledgments with one another. This is actually a practice that we did together at Alternatives in Action and that I have integrated into my podcast. And what I want to acknowledge you for is giving me the opportunity in the moment, literally even on my podcast, to feel some of the discomfort of what it requires to hold your leaders accountable. And for me, just to push you a little bit, I really need you to care about these bills beyond just whether the language is right, but to really work to get it right and to be willing to hear the personal stories. So thank you for framing that as something I need to keep pushing myself on, because I did notice the tension within. It's easier just to let things go. I really acknowledge you for that, for modeling that yourself. Also, I'm leaving with just such an appreciation for the legacy that parents can give to their children of service and leadership. Hearing you talk about how your parents, created space for you to observe them, and how you've created space for your own children, and how it's already being seen as being carried forward with your daughter. And then I just want to acknowledge you too for the power of staying rooted and connected to community. That no matter where you've moved in terms of stepping into more and more position of leadership and influence, that at the end of the day, it's your connection to your partner and your children and your neighborhood and your soccer team that reminds you what really matters. So thank you for sharing all of that in this conversation.
Thank you.
What's coming up for you? What are your takeaways?
Yeah, a few. And thank you for this. Time with you has allowed me and encouraged me to sort of step back and reflect in a way that I don't always do deliberately or consciously. Sort of all of our daily lives, I think, certainly in mine, we sort of get our heads down, we get focused on the task in front of us and then the next task and then the next, just kind of keep pushing and stay busy. But I think it's really important to sort of take a breath and get your head up. And sometimes it's been described as, getting off the dance floor and onto the balcony and kind of looking around and surveying the big picture and reflecting. And so I know I don't do that enough. And you've helped remind me and encourage me to do it more. And the things that you do in terms of when we're starting the conversation, checking in to see how I'm doing, or at the end, as we're doing now, acknowledging one another for, positive things that we've brought to the conversation into each other's lives. Like we blow past that all the time in day-to-day busy activity that we have. And so that's a good reminder to me to how important that is. And also, what you brought up was something around the internal discomfort you felt pushing me on an issue that you're passionate about is something that I want to acknowledge you for. One, for acknowledging the discomfort, but doing it anyway, because that's how a lot of what gets us to a better place as a community requires experiencing discomfort along the way. And whether it's pushing someone to do something that you want them to do in a way that you want them to do it, or maybe pausing, maybe the opposite, pausing for a moment and listening. And one thinks that they have the answer, but they might not have thought every bit. That's important for me to do. I think listening is underrated in this job. And it's probably the most important thing that we can do as leaders is listen to those with experience and expertise and passion. But I think we all need to have a higher tolerance for levels of discomfort as we move to a better place together. It's something that I think prevents us from having necessary conversations and sharing things with others because it makes us uncomfortable. So thank you for doing it anyway. It's a reminder for me to do it too, and a reminder to encourage others and give them the space that when they might feel that discomfort to do it anyway, because it's something that needs to happen and a conversation that we need to have. And it also reminds me that, when you're talking to me, pushing me on some things, listening to me, many others, makes me realize that much more powerful we are when we work together, when we listen to one another, even if we don't agree on every single issue, that we have a common commitment to each other's good faith and values, and that know that we can get there. I feel like we can do anything if we do it together. Sort of that applies to so many things. When me and my constituents, me and you, the community of folks who want to see appropriate reform and accountability for the needless deaths of community members of color throughout the state at the hands of, police officers, for what we can do in California. If there's a common commitment to accept a level of discomfort while also listening to one another and pushing towards a common goal, that's how we get places. That's what my parents taught me. You've made me reflect what my parents have shared with me and their legacy, what they accomplished and what they taught me, the values they instilled in me, and it re-energizes me to continue in that same vein. And it's just a reminder of how important, family is, and community and support networks, and how none of us do the work that we do alone, and how it's always with those that we love and in conjunction with their support and their gifts and their input that we accomplish some of the things that we do together. So that's a lot, but you've made me reflect on a lot. I appreciate that very much, Julie.
Thank you so much, Rob. I'm grateful to know you. I'm grateful to have had this time to reconnect. And I look forward to working together on the things that we made commitments to. Enjoy the rest of your day and more to come.
Thank you, Julie. I feel the same about you. Very much appreciate our friendship, and thank you for this opportunity to spend time with you.
Thank you so much for coming along with me on this episode of the Mother's Quest podcast. I hope this conversation sparked something that will help you live your epic life. If you'd like to get show notes and learn more about the Mother's Quest community, head over to mothersquest.com. And while you're there, I would love it if you would follow the prompts to subscribe, leave a review, and help us spread the word. I want to end with some words to help light the way on your quest. Seize the day. Love your people. Honor your gifts. Until next time.